Welcome to The Explainer. We're about to break down a heist so audacious, so legendary, it was literally called the crime of the century. Yep, we're talking about the Great Train Robbery. Okay, so picture this. It's just after 3 a.m., August 8th, 1963. You're driving a train on a lonely stretch of track, and you see a red light up ahead. A bit weird, but you stop. You have no idea you're about to drive straight into history. Right. So for the driver, a 58-year-old guy named Jack Mills, this wasn't just unusual, it was wrong. I mean, this was the Royal Mail train, the Glasgow to London run. It never stopped here. He knew something was seriously off. And he was right. This was no random stop. It was a trap, a perfectly laid trap. The assistant driver hops out to use the lineside phone to see what's up. The line's dead. Cut. And then, out of the darkness, a gang of 15 men swarmed the engine. The whole thing was brutally efficient. They attacked the crew, and Jack Mills, the driver, was knocked unconscious with an iron bar. So, the gang has the train. The first part of their plan is a success. But you gotta be asking, why this train? Why go to all this trouble? Well, to get that, we need to rewind things a bit. See, a crime this big, it doesn't just happen. It all starts with inside information. So let's talk about that inside info. The whole operation was masterminded by a guy named Bruce Reynolds. But his entire incredible plan hinged on just one thing, a secret source. Someone deep, deep inside the Royal Mail. This source, this Mr. X, he was a senior security officer, and his name was never ever revealed. He gave the gang two absolutely critical pieces of information, the kinds of tips that turn a wild fantasy into a very real, very possible operation. Let's be clear, without this guy, there is no Great Train Robbery. Okay, so tip number one was a huge security flaw. See, the normal mail coach, the high-value package coach, it was fitted with all sorts of modern alarms. But our insider knew that on this exact night, that coach was out of commission. And in its place, an old reserve coach with, you guessed it, no alarm system at all. It was basically a sitting duck. Now for tip number two. This one was all about the money. On a normal day, this train would be carrying maybe 300,000 pounds. I mean, that's a lot of cash for sure. A good haul. But it's not exactly crime of the century material, right? But our insider knew something special was going on. Because of a recent bank holiday weekend, the banks had shipped a ton of extra cash back to London. So this train wasn't carrying the normal amount. It was carrying 10 times that. We're talking 3 million pounds. To put that in perspective, that's like 67 million pounds today. This wasn't a mail train anymore. It was a mobile bank vault on wheels. So, with that kind of intel, the gang was ready to go. Let's jump back to the night of the robbery. The train is stopped, the crew is taken care of. Now what?
Okay, so the first thing they do is uncouple the engine and that valuable mail coach from the rest of the train. Then, they actually get the injured driver, Jack Mills, back on his feet and force him to drive that short section of the train about a kilometer down the track. Their destination? A specific, pre-planned spot, Bridego Bridge. And that's where their getaway truck was hidden, waiting just below.
And then, it was just pure frantic action. They formed a human chain, passing bag after bag of cash down to the truck. They moved 120 mail sacks, weighing a whopping 2.5 tons. I mean, can you imagine? They were working so fast against the clock that they actually left 8 bags behind by mistake. The whole thing was over in just 15 minutes. 15 minutes to pull off the crime of the century. As they were leaving, one of the gang members turned to the captured staff and gave them a final warning. A warning that, ironically, was about to become their biggest mistake. All right, so the gang gets away clean. They drive about 43 kilometers to their secret hideout, a rented place called Leather Slade Farmhouse. They've done it. They're millionaires. And they think they've just pulled off the perfect crime. And how do they celebrate? In the most brazen way possible. They apparently break out a Monopoly board and start playing with the real stolen money. It's almost comical. But that feeling of being on top of the world, it wasn't going to last. See, they had a radio scanner and they were listening in to the police broadcasts, and then they heard it. That little 30-minute warning they gave the train staff, the police used it. They figured, okay, the hideout has to be within a 30-minute drive. They drew a 50-kilometer circle on the map,
And suddenly, the gang realized their farmhouse was smack dab in the middle of the search zone. The walls were closing in.
Absolute panic. The original plan, to lay low until Sunday, was out the window. They decided to bolt right then, on Friday. They quickly split the cash and scattered. They paid one guy to stay behind and do one simple, crucial thing: burn the farmhouse down, destroy all the evidence. Well, he took the money, all right, but he never actually started the fire. And that one single mistake, that was the beginning of the end. The unburned farmhouse wasn't a crime scene. It was an absolute goldmine of evidence for the police. And it didn't take long for a local who was suspicious about all the activity to tip them off.
So police raid the farmhouse, and among all the mail bags and leftover food, they find the one thing that would break the entire case wide open. Something the gang left behind in their mad dash to escape. It was the Monopoly set, the one they used to celebrate, and it was covered, absolutely covered in their fingerprints. All the police had to do was run those prints against their records, and bingo, they had matches. Suddenly, Scotland Yard wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. They had identities, they had names and faces for their most wanted men.
From that moment on, things moved fast, really fast. The investigation just exploded. The men who had been anonymous millionaires just a few days earlier were now fugitives, with their pictures splashed all over the news.
But it's important to remember the real human cost here. While most of the robbers were eventually caught, 14 of them in fact, and got sentenced to 30 years in prison, the story for the train driver Jack Mills is much sadder. He never worked again. He never really recovered from the head injury and the trauma of that night. He died just 7 years later, a direct result of his ordeal.
You know, the robbery left such a deep mark on the public consciousness that it literally changed the map. Brido Bridge, that prearranged meeting spot, is still known today by its informal name, Train Robbers Bridge, a piece of history right there in the landscape.
So in the end, most of the gang was brought to justice. The money was mostly gone, but one huge piece of the puzzle was never, ever found. 14 men were caught, but what about the insider? Who was this anonymous source inside the Royal Mail, the person who made it all possible? That is the one question that, to this day, remains a complete mystery.